Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this evening's panel discussion. My name is Patrice Harris, and I will be the moderator for this conversation. This evening, we are discussing a hotly debated topic surrounding the cannabis industry. This panel discussion forms part of the activities for Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is being celebrated this week. I am joined by several professionals in the industry as well as enthusiasts who will ably contribute to this evening's discussion. I will allow each member of the panelists to introduce him or herself, starting from my immediate left. Mr. Laplace.
Thank you, moderator. Good evening all. My name is Stuart Laplace. I'm here representing the Bureau of Standards, the lab component, and I'm also here as a specialist in hydroponics in terms of an alternate form of growing for cannabis.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Laplace.
Good to be here.
Hi, good night. My name is Linvy Burnham, aka Bingy Nuts, owner of Bingy Nuts Hair Salon. I have a range of products that contains the marijuana plant or the hemp plant, and it helps to promote hair growth.
Thank you for joining us, Bingy Nuts.
Patona greetings. My name is Las Aya from Bingy Tiakosiada, and I'm here in the essence of the invitation from Brother Delvin. I'm thankful for being on this panel. Give thanks.
Thank you for joining us, Ras Aya.
Hi, my name is Everton Delaney, aka Blender. Most people know me as from Facebook, strong advocate for the marijuana plant. I'd just like to put my input into tonight's discussion.
Thank you for joining us, Blender.
Good evening, everyone. Garth Wilkin, Attorney General. I'm here to talk about the legal system in relation to the new cannabis industry.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. AG.
Good night, everybody. Garfield Alexander, medical doctor.
Thank you for joining us, Doc. All right, so based on the introductions that you would have just heard, you can see that we have a variety of individuals with varying backgrounds and experiences who can ably contribute to this conversation. We are going to start the conversation by allowing the AG to give us the understanding, help us to understand better what is the present legislative framework as it relates to the steps towards the cannabis industry. So Mr. AG, tell us, I see you have the act pulled up, so tell us what is relevant to improve our understanding.
Okay, that discussion has to start with the Cannabis Act, which was a piece of legislation passed in 2020. And that act provides for the establishment of a medical cannabis authority to regulate, monitor, and control the cultivation, supply, possession, production, and use of medicinal cannabis and for related matters. What that act does is it sets up a medical cannabis authority, which is the body under which the rules that will govern the medical cannabis industry will be set. It establishes the board of directors, it talks about the administration, how it's being financed, etc. And it goes on to discuss access to medicinal cannabis. So that includes the prescription mechanism for doctors. It also speaks about regulation of the use of cannabis in places of worship. It talks about issuance of identification cards. That means if doctors are to prescribe persons to use cannabis for any of their health-related matters, they're supposed to have a special ID card that the authority can keep track of, and other forms of regulating the industry, including granting licenses to cultivators, granting licenses to retailers, granting licenses to pharmacies, etc. All of the different players in the medical cannabis world are regulated by the authority. So that is, in a summary form, what the legislation does. Just to let everyone know, the only aspects of the legislation that are actually in place right now is the authority. the licensing scheme and all of that has not been brought into force. The authority was brought into force in April 2021. There were some regulations issued in July of this year. However, the other aspects of the Act dealing with the licensing and the access to medicinal cannabis, so the regulation of the doctors granting the prescriptions and so forth, that is not in force. The plan is for this government to bring the whole Act in force so that persons can begin to get licenses to start their cultivation, and doctors can find out what are the rules and regulations about granting the prescriptions, and persons with illnesses who are prescribed by doctors to be able to utilize how they access the cannabis for that use. And all of that will be done under the framework of the authority. And I want people to know this is the start. The start, I don't know if people realize, for example, in California, it started as a medicinal industry. Some states in the US, for example, moved to recreational, but it's not advisable to jump straight into recreational, even though Rasaya would disagree with me, my good friend Rasaya. Let us start in this way. Let us get people with licenses. Let everything be regulated. Let's see how it works. Let the doctors control the access, and then we go forward. But it also, as I indicated before, provides regulation. The authority can provide regulation for places of worship. So the theocracy, Nyabingi Theocracy Order, or any other Rastafarian groups, their places of worship can use cannabis under the regulations that this Act envisions. That came about, you see, setting the whole scheme with the Ras Sankofa case. Before the Ras Sankofa judgment in 2019, the use of cannabis, the cultivation of cannabis by anyone was illegal. What the Ras Sankofa decision did was the court found that Rastafari is a religion, and their rights to use cannabis as a part of their religion and their meditation and their worship practices is fine. It is within their constitutional right to do so. So restricting members of the Rastafari faith from participating in their religion is unconstitutional. So that was determined. What was also determined is just saying you cannot cultivate, just saying you cannot possess cannabis is also unconstitutional. Meaning an adult in private can partake in cannabis if they so choose. Right? So the court said you cannot just have a blanket restriction on use of cannabis. And this was after evidence was put in from science perspective, from religious perspectives, and distilled by the court in that case. That is what it determined. Also determined you cannot just stop cultivation. First of all, that would interfere with the Rastafari rights. And it also interferes with your private rights. So the court gave the parliament the opportunity to fix the law so that it comes in line with the Constitution. So the authority now, which is a little separate from that, but which creates a regime by which cultivation can be licensed and possession can be authorized, deals with those sorts of issues where before cannabis was a no-no. You will go to jail if you're caught with it. Now, possession of a certain amount, you cannot take it away from the person. You can just simply give them a ticket. Right? That means it is not made legal, but it is decriminalized. Meaning you're not going to jail for possession of a certain amount.
All right. In your introductory statement, you would have touched on so many of the topics and questions that I wanted to ask, and I think that you would have so beautifully summarized and explained the present legislative framework, and later on I will allow you to contribute further as to what exactly are some of the next steps that will be taken, and if there is even a time frame. But considering that the AG has laid the framework, I would like for each of the panelists now to contribute to describe for us what your ideal cannabis industry would look like from your vantage point. What does it include? Who does it benefit? What are some of the obvious benefits? And even if there are some drawbacks that you want us to speak about. So the AG would have just mentioned that the Act right now speaks specifically to medicinal use, and there is an expectation for recreational use, hopefully in the very near future. So if each of the panelists can chime in, not all at once, to tell me, describe rather what your ideal cannabis industry business would look like. You want to take a go for it, Blender?
Sure.
Okay.
My idea for the cannabis industry going forward in St. Kitts will have to be like branding, like have exclusive products like from St. Kitts and draw people to come here, like boost the tourism industry, also in economics. When you have when you're competing against the bigger countries in the strains and production, mass production, we're not going to catch up with them because they're way ahead of us right now. So right now, I feel like if we're gonna do something in industry, it's something to bring people here, like probably hotels that allow like smoking of cannabis, selling of cannabis in the private area. Also we have licensed coffee shops around certain selected areas, away from schools and other businesses that really don't want to tolerate the cannabis. Mm-hmm. Also introduce exclusive products like drinks, like exclusive strains of marijuana that's just grown in St. Kitts. So if you really want to enjoy it, you have to come here and contribute to the economy instead of we going out getting seed that's grown basically everywhere marijuana is grown, and you can't compete with that. Nobody gonna leave America to come here to smoke purple haze. So it's best we have something exclusive to us. So you make people come here, even have like a botanical garden where people could come from overseas and see how marijuana is grown.
All right, so these are some very big ideas, Blender, some of which are very, very exciting. And I know I heard some of the chuckles and saw some of the nods from some of your fellow panelists. Maybe they were thinking along some of those same lines as it relates to what they would like for the industry to look like. I will allow for any of the other panelists to chime in now as well to say, even if it's from the medicinal perspective, as the Act speaks to now, or even from the recreational perspective, what does that look like for you? Doc?
Okay.
Yes.
For me, it definitely has to be balanced. As we can see by the panel that we have tonight, we have doer standards, we have persons who are into aesthetics and posology, Aya who is spiritually in tune and wants his slice of the pie as well. So for me, it definitely has to be balanced. There definitely has to have some social equity and some justice entwined in it, because again, I would be full-heartedly on board with Aya in terms of reparations. There must be some reparatory justice in this, in terms of the Rastafarians have been in the vanguard of not only legalization of cannabis, but the way we eat, the way we approach spirituality, the way we approach being Africans and looking at that legacy. So for years we've been lambasting them, locking them up. They're the first to get locked up, the first to get searched. So if we now create this industry as if none existed before, it would definitely be unbiased and still along the same lines, because as we could see from some of the mistakes made in Jamaica and even in the US, when you take a look at what they call a cannabis industry, it still has the disparities that were there before. The same disparities that the war on drugs created are still very much entwined in the industry, as you could see there. So for me, for think it's definitely taking our time, making sure it's balanced, making sure that there's some reparations and some social equity in it. That would be my short answer.
Short and sweet. How about?
Can I join the doc, please?
Definitely.
Give thanks, and I would like to really start this program with a prayer, because when we deal with the herb, we deal with it from a spiritual level. So we're thankful for the format of this discussion, but herb is from the Almighty, not mankind. So I don't care how mankind is trained and all kind of make up within the cloning. We deal herb from a natural ability. Now we find the age lay out some groundwork with he briefed him, but he hid something on the floor, and me not hide it. The judge said that Rasta have the right to use herb in the custom. It said there in the Constitution, but we find that we still seeing people being bombarded by Babylon and the structure of their society makeup, because they have ways and means to make sure that when the industry is open up, as the Virgin outline, because it open up, but it's not really touching who need to be touched. And if we're going to really go into our industry, we have to be mindful how we're going forward, because I want nothing to do with no strain. I go ganja, that's what I look for. Once I get meditation, that's what I seek out. No disrespect my Virgin who wants strain up in America, because we don't want that. They misthink that clone. We want natural ganja. And we hope that the AG and the Prime Minister and those in the Parliament take the time, bring this into a understanding that the industry need to be format within our people locally first. I mean, I play no people who went on the street to get harassed and the police kick down the doors, and then we have to run behind, and then they embarrass us in front of the youths, you know. So we know what we're facing. That's why we say, AG, we have a lot of discussion to go beyond. So I hope when you're ready, we see the compensation come along, because I not just look for no licensing, you know. Because I not come in the medical field. I come in a ganja field. So thanks a lot. Blessed love.
Such a spirited contribution. And we're going to touch on some of those points that you would have mentioned, because I actually did think about them before coming in. I really want us to have that conversation. But I will allow your two fellow panelists to provide their contributions now as to what they would like for that industry to look like, include, benefit, and so forth.
Okay, can I go for it?
Sure.
Okay. For me, I'm not really expounding on the THC part of it, which is psychoactive. I really want to go into the CBD form of it, which contains the goodness, I call it the goodness, the omega-3, the omega-6, the omega-9, the antioxidants, vitamin A, C, and E, the keratin, the collagen. That is what I'm going to be expounding on, because really and truly that is what hair needs, right? There's a lot of cases of alopecia here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And with that said, I've researched certain plants here in St. Kitts that are needed to actually help with the alopecia, right? I've recently started writing a book about herbs in the Caribbean that actually alleviates hair loss, right? It's not finished, but it's on its way, right? And I've tested out my oil, which is a lactonic, on myself, because I shaved off my locks right down to the core. And I tried it on my hair. Don't watch the hair right now. It's coming. It's coming. And I've tried it on my hair, and my daughter's hair, and my son's hair, and other clients' hair, and it is awesome. I actually have a waiting list for it. Oh, wow. Yes. So, with that said, I would like to actually get strains of plant, preferably the hemp plant that contains more CBD, and that would actually help to boost the business, the hair care line here in St. Kitts. Because once we touch base with that, once we go into the core with that and add it with other essential oils that are actually helping with the hair loss, then St. Kitts would be on the map in the hair care industry. That's my 2 cents.
Definitely a different perspective. Also quite exciting to hearing about your book and the type of study and research you've been doing. I'm told that you're a former science teacher? Okay. All right, Mr. Laplace?
Well, for me, when it comes to the testing and the regulation, if I may echo the sentiments of the doc and the AG and Blender as well, and my good friend here, not only as a tourism product for persons coming here to enjoy, but also to send out some of our products that meet the international standards and benchmarks in the EU and the United States. Things like chocolates, edibles, etc. There are standards out there that actually are used to set that standard for consumables. Additionally, as my good friend here pointed out, in terms of targeting the different cannabinoids in cannabis, especially when you look at the indica and the sativa varieties. In her case, something like hemp would be more beneficial as she's targeting the CDB. So a lot of discussion needs to go around in terms of, as I was pointed out, getting a local variety that speaks specifically to what we have here to offer, while at the same time you have to envisage a lot of different perspectives with persons who would have different business ideas and what they're trying to target as a product. So everyone here might have a different perspective in terms of what sells. But so we have to take that into consideration and leaving everything open. And as the AG pointed out, kind of have to take your time in terms of putting all this together, so it's more all-inclusive than exclusive.
Okay, and later on in the conversation, we will speak more to how the Bureau of Standards will be assisting in the build-out of the industry. I want to take this opportunity now to speak to one of the points that Ras Aya would have mentioned earlier. One of the myths, or perhaps one of the conversations that is hotly debated, is that with the build-out of the cannabis industry, it's going to leave behind or not be so beneficial to some of its current users and the persons who plant. And so it's going to be very focused on big business and not so much more so entrepreneurs and the persons who would have traditionally been involved. What is our thought process on that?
Well, in terms of the legislation, the legislation as it's drafted, which we are currently reviewing, does allow for locals to have a much lower licensing fee than overseas persons and international groups. And I agree with Doc. There's no sense that we go into this new industry, in this new world, without benefiting our people first. And not just benefiting our people first, benefiting the people who have done this for decades and decades and who have almost perfected their craft. That is why, particularly for the Rastafari community, there will be regulation. I know Rasaya doesn't like that word, but there will be rules as to the Rastafari community is growing for their worship purposes, separate and apart from selling as medical cannabis or as a business. So the act itself, whilst it is not in force, we are going to bring it in force, and we are going to establish regulations for the Rastafari community to then be able to grow for their own use. What will happen now is the Rastafari community, as far as I'm concerned, and what I gather from my discussions already with the Prime Minister about how we want to approach this, should be the ones to first benefit from licenses and the training that will be needed, because it's a very complex scheme, but it's complex for a reason. You're still dealing with a plant, the byproducts of which have an effect on person's mind. Anything like that is liable for abuse, and therefore you have to ensure that the whole public is protected when you're dealing with mass production. Right now, you could grow a certain amount of trees in your yard. You could then take those trees when they are mature, dry them, create your ganja, your weed, and smoke it in the privacy of your own home, and it is legal. What is not legal right now is you purchasing cannabis, marijuana, weed, whatever you want to call it, from someone else.
Why not?
So, what this regime does, it allows for persons to be able to purchase once you have a prescription. As I said, the legislation right now does not permit sale for recreational use. We might reach to that point. But, and I'm not the policy maker in chief. The parliament, the cabinet, then the parliament will decide what is the policy going forward. But it makes sense. We already have this infrastructure. We could run with it, test it out, see how the medical marijuana industry works first. If then everything runs well, we could eventually go into the next phase. But I'm happy you mentioned the hemp, because that is something that came up in a discussion with the Minister of Agriculture. Because, as you know, I don't know if a lot of people realize, but the hemp, the THC is what really gives you the high.
No
right?
longer high, we get meditation.
The meditation, I'll use your language, Rasaya. The THC is what gives you the meditation. But the other byproducts of the cannabis, it can be used for other things. What can be done is the medical authority could then make regulations to deal with the hemp industry and to deal with the CBD.
One thing I'm missing on the AG. In hemp, remember hemp is a different formation of how it go within the wild and we ain't got 10 mile radius of land space like that to plant hemp. So we cannot plant hemp in St. Kitts and Nevis. We got damage when we go in plucking with other plants. And well, we have the virgin here who work in what I call it? Bureau standard. They do lab, they do testing and so. So, Virgin, do you think hemp could go in St. Kitts and Nevis as a way of foul it for industry?
You're going to get a lot of cross-pollination.
Okay then, see?
Unless you put it to the north of the island like that way.
Indoors.
We only thing he could say the best aspect is the indoor.
Really productive, really short, and it's again because if they're not distinguishable genetically, you still can cross-pollinate. So if you're going into a industry that's looking into THC and flowers, then that pollination is going to disrupt that, because for the hemp you only want the CBD, which is collected in the stems and all the other plants. So to really run two industries of that sort in a small place like St. Kitts really wouldn't be feasible. There would be some issues.
And that is why you have an authority, because the authority can then say, yes, we want to have use of hemp by local persons who can then use the CBD, but maybe we could import it. And the authority can then say, let us import the hemp that can be used in manufacturing, for example, in your business. That is why the authority is there, to make those decisions. You see? And that is why you need structures, because, I mean, I don't know much about the cannabis industry. I know the law. But you consult. And that is why the National Commission on Cannabis, of which Rasaya and Doc were a part, I believe the report was when, Doc? 2019, made certain recommendations as how to progress the industry.
Okay.
And they sat down, y'all did town halls, y'all spoke to medical experts and so forth. So the medical marijuana, the medical cannabis structure came out of that public consultation. Where we go to next will also have to be based on consultation.
Education.
And education.
But to further your point about the traditional growers, and again, the AG did mention that, as I myself were on the marijuana, this St. Kitts and Nevis Marijuana Commission, and we did extensive work and extensive interface with the general public and all the stakeholders. But we also invited the chairperson of the Jamaica Medical Cannabis Authority. And even at that point, even at that stage in 2019, he lamented some of the facts that the traditional growers weren't really empowered. and that's Jamaica, which has the biggest ganja brand worldwide. So lots of persons are pressuring us. I'm sure the AG is getting as much cause as I am in terms of this industry and rolling it out. But again, we can't take it from a perspective of investors and just making money. Again, because as you can see as our panel here, and everybody has similar aims but varying ways about getting to it. It's the same way. We, by the use of an authority, and I, like Ras Aya, was not somebody big on establishing this through an access of medical cannabis alone, because lots of the places and lots of the examples that we've seen, it's not truly medical. When you're dealing with medicine, it has to be standardized, it has to be science. It can't be anecdotal. And again, I agree with the AG in that sense that we have to decide what is our framework and what will be our access points to, and I hate the word industry, because again, it's not an industry, and if we continue saying that we're somehow creating a new industry, it's not. Because we have persons who've been trafficking it, using it. Even if you're just drinking tea, that would have been illegal, is illegal via the laws that were there before. So again, everybody would have been interfacing with the plant in some way, some shape, some fashion, illegally. So this is not a new industry, it's how we now reframe it so it benefits a wider cross-section of the society. And I think that could only be done through an infrastructure and a framework of medicine, where we have guidelines, where we already have stakeholders like the pharmacists involved and associations. Because again, St. Kitts can take the exact same route as St. Vincent or Jamaica. And we have to empower our traditional growers and the persons that were traditionally involved in the so-called industry. I also want to piggyback after a statement that Blender made, because he was the first to intervene. And he mentioned branding. And again, that's a big part of how we want to go forward. I've had meetings with the AG and Minister Duggins, and everybody's on board about a Kittian brand, a Layamiga brand of, it could start with cannabis because that's the industry that's trending now, and that's where the focus is, but it could happen for our tomato, for our guava. I attended a session today that was on establishing intellectual property of plants. When we traveled to Antigua, we spoke to insurance companies that were insuring crops, and not on a company level, but on a government level. So this is a unique industry. We're in a unique position, because I was one on Facebook lamenting that we were dead last. And now we really poised in a position to really change the landscape. If you look at wine and how the Europeans and these colonizers have established a brand of wine that goes around the world, that Chile now has opened up and has to use that same IP. Think about that for our brand of cannabis, our brand of flowers, our brand of CBD, that we could trademark. That person's flying. When we're talking about a more immersive experience in terms of tourism, persons would come in just to roll a joint with Ras Aya. Not that they don't know how to, or they don't want to partake.
Pipe chalice.
Right. Somebody will come here and build a chalice. So this notion that we always have to get a huge loan to establish a business, to buy a taxi to get involved in the tourist industry. It doesn't. People want immersive experience. They want to come here and see what Kittitians do and eat what Kittitians eat. Go buy blender and cook ital, and that is an experience for them, and they're willing to pay for that. And that is the brand of tourism that we have to start looking at, to reframe it so we don't, it's not, everything can't be extraction. Like I know a lot of persons are waiting in line just to come in to see investors and foreign direct investment, but we had that with sugar. We had that tobacco. It started off obliterating our indigenous populations for tobacco. Sugar came next. And we are known as Sugar City, and there's no landmark. There's no great legacy left behind by sugar, no great wealth. We cannot allow that to happen with cannabis. Cannot.
Rasa, you were the one who placed this on the table first, and I would really love for you to chime in here to tell us about what you would love for the industry to look like, especially for the traditional growers and users.
I will say from first, I'd like to say thanks for the elders them who went through the suffering, because we know it wasn't easy in them time, knowing how they had to run from the times of police in Batcher time, in Simmons time, in Douglas time, in Timothy time, and still in Dr. Joe time. So we say, we're thankful that now we can have this debate and we're able to bring forth knowledge to the people, because there's a lot of things that we can able to see how the industry can fame out and make use in our traditional goals. I say, a lot of people say, well, if we go into the industry, we'll lose a lot of the money. But there's a lot of things we can able to create out of this industry. You know, even the same hemp can create fiber where we can able to make rope, clothes, shoes. Sometimes we even buy things from America. We have our own clothes line on here. With ganja, we are talking about. We don't see that they happen here, so we are talking about experience. Now, I use ganja stick to clean my teeth. I don't use no toothpaste, no toothbrush, so I'm thankful. And my teeth them look good. And Majesty, I just like to say that the industry is very serious. We're going to approach it. And Rastafari, I have seen a lot of ways we can approach the industry. We can approach it in oil itself, because we had seen a live demonstration just recently of this month here, where we have a dialogue between Sinkers and Navies. And I realize when we start, we didn't outline Navies, but we need to know that we are a federation, so Navies boys need to know that we're representing them too, you know. Give thanks for the Navies people, them, who are able to stand up with I and I when we go across the waters. Or what we say here is that the oil production that we have seen, a live demonstration happen with a Virginian Banky, he brings some raw ganja and he able to outline the way how he could process oil from the raw ganja without even, as other people that do boiling and all them other things. He just do it in a formation where he have a thing there where he buy from our, and he could have even to put it in a pot set, and he could have get the processing from there. And I was glad to see that that kind of format there were able to show where we can able to help create an economic market. And you see, these are things that we not just the ganja, you can use lemongrass, we can extract oil and them things, because lemongrass oil is stronger than a lot of oil one here, you know. Yeah, one little drip sent up the whole place like in here. So even ganja oil, I could take that there and put it in my tongue, and that they will give me a nice smell too, you know. So when we talk about taste, it's not about silver, because I love me high aeration. Yeah? So we know that the industry can create various means. It can give us paper, even though we say we're going to try the plastic, and we still see a lot of plastic in the sinks and these. They say they want to put a ban on top of plastic, but we still see many supermarkets are engaging. So these are areas we can tap in the industry and create biodegradable plastic and biodegradable film crates and so we don't have to be bringing in them things that we're serious about, as they say climate change. I just see your former Prime Minister making some statement there on climate change. Dr. Denzel Douglas, the Right Honorable, when he returned me, he will have a dialogue, because the ways and means we really need to know how we are moving in this climate change, and hemp can help us too in the region, not just in Sinkers and Navies. So I hope bilateral agreement with the CARICOM body, but will formulate to lead the fight towards the discussion of herb in the region. And we find out that we have a local commission that established under the farmer administration, and see what they have outlined. My brother, AG, me say, some of the things them need to throw right back out, and then we go back into the format of a proper discussion. My brother, you know that we strongly stand against how we are able to see how the frame up of the discussion had laid out, because sometimes we even go to some communities that we didn't see one person shop. As I'm telling you, one person in the shop. Even in the Prime Minister residence, we went to Tabernacle, and not even one person shop in that area there, and it's in the Prime Minister at that time. Tabernacle, I talk about Joshua Adebayo Primary School, not one. Just to show you because how he was providing the discussion, he was trying to control everything. Now I hope this Prime Minister don't try to control, because when you do that, you create a revolution stand to people who know about ganja, and we don't want no confrontation around all these movements here. We just want to have framework that we can able to have good guidance for the people them, and knowing that those don't have to follow what I said, but let us bring a framework that can guide things and nation and the region, because we want to know we do America and Europe. Give thanks.
Well, I will allow you to provide the last contribution before we go to a quick break.
Okay. I don't like the term traditional growers. Let's be blunt and prosecuted. Because most traditional growers been to jail or been persecuted before because the love of ganja and cultivation. So I feel like those people are supposed to get the first preference when it comes to licensing, education, duty-free, whatever. Because if you're not going to give them financial compensation, you got to give them first preference to actually do something what they've been doing all along.
All right, and I think the AG will pick up nicely on that when we return from our commercial break. So thank you for tuning in. We're now going to have a commercial break. Stick and stay until we get back.
I rise in a point of order.
You should be here.
Listen. Sit down and listen. When we get it back,
you should be here.
When we get it back in,
You should be here.
when we go till and wine again.
You should be here.
What if cannabis sail on the ark again?
You should be here.
Thing we know. We want back with cannabis.
You should be here.
One thing for sure. We need back. Red blood. I rise in a point of order.
You should be here.
Listen. Sit down and listen. When we get it back,
You should be here.
when we get it back in,
You should be here.
when we go till and wine again.
You should be here.
What if cannabis sail on the ark again?
You should be here.
Thing we know. We want back with cannabis.
You should be here.
One thing for sure. We need back. Look on people. Yeah. What's up, my keep? Where? What's up, my keep? No. What's up, my keep? What's up, my keep? Everybody, do what? Take over. Drop. Take over. Do. Take over. Drop. Take over. Everybody, spend out. We are the attack, I tell you. Spend out.
Thank you for staying with us. You are tuned into the CannaBiz panel discussion organized by the Small Business Development Unit and in celebration of Global Entrepreneurship Week. The conversation so far has been quite spirited, and we have touched on several topics as it relates to the present reality for the cannabis and marijuana industry and what the projections are for the future. Just before our break, we would have started to have the conversation about the protection and the benefits for some of the traditional growers of marijuana. One of the panelists mentioned that he's not in so much favor of the word traditional growers and spoke to some of the harsh realities that those individuals would have faced prior. And so now the AG is going to respond to that comment and speak to some of the benefits and the protections for those individuals.
Before the AG goes,
Sure.
the reason why the word tradition was used is to add value, actually, because one of the things that we don't mention a lot is that these guys actually have sort of like a PhD already. They're the ones that nobody could come in here, I don't care how experienced they've been, how knowledgeable, they don't know about Kittitian soil. They don't know about Keon and Molyneux and Tabernacle and how our rain fluctuates and that type of thing. And specifically our soil and some of the traditional ways in which we grow the cannabis plant that's endemic to here in St. Kitts. So when you say tradition, it comes with that format as well. We know that they've been lambasted, we know they've received a lot of negative stereotypes, but really if we going forward, if that's not the view, if we don't reframe our view of them, these farmers, these boatmen, because again, when we talk about Vincy weed and Jamaican weed, it had to get here. That's a skill set in its own, traversing the narrow waters and coming up from different islands. That's another skill set that somebody has already had that lock, stock, and barrel. Institutional knowledge, like we refer to it in other places. So tradition is really was to add value to as well.
All right.
We can't go back in time and fix the errors of our past, but what we can do is, in the plan to move forward, we can ensure that there is some form of reparation for the persons who have been subjected to laws that may have not been right. So what the plan is, from a policy perspective thus far with the government, we are looking at the expunging of criminal records. There's currently an act, but we believe that it needs to be expanded as to the person that it applies to. So we're currently looking at that. And the next phase of our reparation, our internal reparation, will be then preference to, I know Blender doesn't like the traditional growers, but the growers of the past, right? To be the first persons that have the access to these licenses where they can sell to persons legally. Because they've been selling to persons for a long time, and it was deemed illegal. Under this framework, my belief, this is my personal belief, and I know it's the belief of the Prime Minister because we've discussed this, we want these persons to benefit first from the new industry. And it's not just, I know Doc says, doesn't like the word industry, but I like that word, because industry means that it's a system by which persons can benefit, right? Persons can now then sell to the dispensaries for then persons to now pay at the pharmacy to get the marijuana, get the cannabis. And then those growers of the past, which is the new term I'm going to use, can then benefit financially and maybe expand their cultivation. They can get bigger acreage of land. They can have designated areas from the Ministry of Agriculture. That's one of the things that Doc and the Minister of Agriculture and I discussed. We want to make sure that we have a balance because we have to feed our people, but we also want to facilitate this industry. Both of those things require land being provided to farmers. But we don't want to just give out land to anyone to the detriment of the other. So we have to have a plan, a holistic agricultural plan as to how we're going to distribute land for cultivation of cannabis and land for cultivation of tomatoes and cucumbers and pumpkin and other things that we need to reduce our food bill. So that discussion is currently being had at a macro level, and then is going to fall into place when the authority starts functioning, because there was an authority, it just did not do anything because they had no legal backing. It was really just we have an authority. I mean, not even a shell. It was nothing. It was in name and payment alone. They did nothing, they issued no licenses, they had no regulations. The actual parts of the act which allowed them to grant licenses and get the doctors on board to be certified as persons who can grant the prescriptions was not brought into force. So it was just an authority in name alone. We're going to correct that wrong. And we're going to do it in a very strategic way. That is why Doc, who was part of the commission, is going to be one of the persons leading that charge. One of the things that we have discussed as well is education. It's a very complex scheme. So it's not going to be the authorities accepting applications tomorrow and people show up and get their licenses. There are a lot of checks and balances and requirements that need to go into before you can actually reach that point. So while I'm saying that, I ask for people to have patience. I'm not saying wait for 10 years. I'm saying give the authority a chance after we have now amended the legislation to allow them to work, to then reach the point where we are seeing the cultivators of the past getting their licenses. We are seeing the places of worship for Rastafari getting their permissions, right? So everything they do is lawful. I have to be the primary advocate for the rule of law. Right? And Rasaya is correct. And I didn't hide it, Rasaya. You were correct. In the Ras Sankofa case, I said it. It was declared that Rastafari is a religion, and they are allowed to practice part of their sacrament, which is the use of cannabis.
So, I mean, when you say that we get regulated, we got more than regulated, because when we just had China, it's another being gathering, and but hey, you know, and talk about the ganja we had there.
Yes, well, Rasaya, you understand there has to be some sort of control.
No, we don't have no control, we have meditation flow.
Yes, but
in my being is a feel, you know, so we don't force nothing on no one, you know. If you come and all, we have said AG. If you don't want to smoke
I want
the
my
ganja,
invitation.
you can get a drink and all.
I want my invitation for the next. I want my invitation for the next one.
Well, you see, when you come, make sure you come in the mystical meditation, you know, because I tell you, eating no flesh, you know, and no alcohol, you know, so you have to.
I don't know.
No, just letting him know that he don't have to know these things, you know, because this is how Rasta move, you know. Rasta move vibrant in here with food and vegetables and the ganja right there. So if you want to smoke or you want to even vaporize, you can do it. So.
Okay. But Rasaya, regulation could simply mean designated places of worship.
No, when we move, you hear the Constitution say, once we move over there, I say, me go ganja there. That's how.
So you could declare, these studios?
That's what I mean, because hear him say, you know, it's how your custom come, you know. So me come here, me not go smoking here because we don't know the meditation flow here. But if we are out in the square, the police supposed to come in there.
No, that can't work. You have to protect the public as well.
What we say, and the
they have people with asthma.
Listen me carefully, you know. People understand this, you know. We don't come here to force no smoking and no one here. We say when we in the square, we have to gather within the ancestors. So we are more within the spiritual level. We smoke ganja in there, and we have vital in there. Now, the last time we went in there, when Under Timothy I smoked ganja free. That's the first time in a long time I said, no, because me and the assistant commissioner, we are long and I tell him what's here. If you don't want me smoke and eat, you can't come in this place, come harass us.
So you're talking about the rule of man, not the rule of law?
No, the Almighty law, we are talking from here now. So we say, no fight the ganja, just let it be free, because man got to be free to use ganja.
So how about this? Because this is an important discussion. The regulation could be the authority. The Nyabingi theocracy or any Rastafari particular body could come to the authority and say, these are our designated places of worship. We want them to be designated so that there's no issue with us smoking there. Then there could be a provision in the regulations which says, we also want to celebrate our ancestors and visit certain places. Can we get permission for a certain place at a certain time to then practice our sacrament there? And then what you do to protect the public is, you can cordon off, because the fact is, Rasaya, there are a lot of people in our society that have asthma and they have other respiratory diseases that are impacted by smoke. Not just cannabis, but smoke. So we have to all live together. So I don't see why, if the regulations are there, for you to then say, we want this square to celebrate our ancestors. You can then get a permission and then you cordon off a certain area so that you know the smoke is not impacting certain people, everybody's happy. That's not a good solution?
No, you can't get that solution there. Anyway, we'll probably be in the part of the square, in the area between National and TDC, facing Central Street, so you know, we buy the tree. Now, how we move there, we know the impact of people don't really be in that area as how we climb up. Once ago when it was Rasta gathering in the 70s and coming up to the 80s, it was more bigger crowd. Now the crowd had diminished over some time. But we say, we like to know when we're in the square, we use ganja in there. Even today, me walk on and sink it in a basket and burn ganja in my pipe. I know I said no smoke on the street, but I smoking on my veggie because I feel my mind. No disrespect moderator, but me just tell you how me move to the sink it, you know. When I go to the island and I smoke ganja, you know, so me not here to violate nobody, but me love ganja and me feel free when me use ganja. So me not go talk, but me I go behind, go hide and say police are come here now. You either go if you go me ganja, I go with me too. So you're going to take me ganja and tell me, because they happen already and we have experience. So AJ has some answers coming up on you soon.
All right, I'm thoroughly enjoying this back and forth, but I really want us to have a conversation as well on what the AJ would have touched on earlier about land use and growing and land distribution for growing. Now, I know we have Mr. Laplace here with us, who is wearing two hats, being the director of the Bureau of Standards, as well as an agriculturist at heart as well. So is there an opportunity and provisions for some of the more non-traditional ways to actually grow the marijuana?
Yes, but it's going to be difficult, it's going to be expensive. We have a very small land space. We have a myriad of species. With a lot of cultivars within species. A lot of persons prefer this brand over, well, I don't want to use the word straight because that's is, you know. So it's like, I mean, it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of techniques we can use. You could use, like hydroponics is one of the techniques they would use overseas. Me and Rasai had a conversation earlier about some of the rationale why they're using it because of the seasonality, etc. Also, some persons who are into the extract industry, they do a lot of indoor growing because you can control the lighting period. So cannabis is a plant that likes a lot of light, consistent light and water as well as, you know, training. Like you can't just show the seeds out there and expect them to, you know, to get the high levels of colors or what we call the buds and the plant to actually formulate the way you want them to formulate. So there's a lot of training in bending, you know, separating the fan leaves from the sugar leaves. I mean, when you get down into the nitty gritty, it all depends on what scale you want to go, what you're trying to achieve, whether you're looking at medicinal in terms of if you're targeting TCH, if you're targeting the cannabinoid, if you're targeting the terpenes, like Rasai would have indicated that if you come to the Nyabingi event and you don't want to smoke, you don't want to drink, you could inhale, and the variety that deals a lot with that as it relates to the inhalation could be something that persons could use as their product, like they're selling, because with the terpenes, that is I mean, Rasai could correct me, but I think that is one of the ways person determine if this is a good weed.
Good herb. We don't use terpene in Virgin. We got a steam chalice, you know. So that's why we say vaporize, because the herb ain't a bun.
No, I mean, no. When I say terpene, I'm talking about what gives this smell of cannabis, right? Naturally, and I mean, funny, it's the same terpene in mango. It's the same exact terpene in cannabis, and you could smell a mango when you're in a room. The same way somebody have cannabis in a room, you could smell it, and the same thing goes with citrus and all the other plants. But some persons prefer to remove the turpentine because they have a lot of lipids in there that may interfere. My good friend here like the idea of having the lipids in there. But I mean, when you look at the industry as a whole, as I said, it depends on what is required, and it's up to the commission to really set the benchmark in terms of you know, what they're going to do, but I mean, it's some very large shoes to fill because they have to please a lot of people with a lot of different ideas. But it is not impossible, but it has to be targeted based on scale. So you have somebody might be interested in growing a particular strain and they do not want any cross-contamination. That might be something that you have to do indoors. But if you're outdoors, then it could disrupt your particular variety that you're trying to, to establish. But hydroponics can handle that. We have excellent soil here that could also handle that. We have traditional knowledge in terms of the growers and how they would plant and the seasonalities, how they're going to apply water, the times of the year, etc. And we have persons also here very good in understanding how to train, using bonsai technique, how to train the plant, doing the bending and doing a lot of the hybridization and mixing indica with sativa and the other one, the Reparations, yeah, that's the one that's they consider to be like a lower garbage variety of cannabis, but if you combine that with other species like the indica, the sativa, you get a very powerful product and very antifungal properties, biocidal properties, etc. So the conversation is very wide, but at the same time it can be narrowed based on individual preference, but it all hinges on what the commission chooses as the way forward.
Something to add, Rasael?
Yeah,
All right,
Personal preference.
I want to give both Blender and Bingy Nuts an opportunity to contribute to the conversation, especially from an entrepreneurial perspective. You would have spoken, Bingy Nuts, about research and writing a book and doing all that it was necessary to create that lock, what did you call it? Lock tonic?
Yeah.
Lock tonic. So I really want you to be able to join in the conversation, especially from an entrepreneurship perspective, because we're speaking about medicinal marijuana, we're speaking about recreational use. Let's talk about the entrepreneurship perspective.
Well, for me, it has been very profitable, I might say. I'm actually making more than my past teacher's salary from it.
Thank you.
So it's very profitable in that sense. How I try to market my product is that, as I said before, I use it on myself. I gave them a synopsis of how the changes occur from when I shave my head to actually getting hair follicles. So I actually give them a time frame, right? And then I gave out samples, because you make sure you give out samples for people to try. And then afterwards, I asked them to leave a review. After they left a review, I asked other persons to leave a review. And then after that, I created a market for the lock tonic. It wasn't easy at first because it's trial and error. You have to make sure, test different herbs to ensure that you get that right product, that balance. But my main product, as I said before, is the hemp plant. If no hemp plant is there, I'm not making the oil. People would have to wait. That's why I said there's a waiting list, right? I also make lock bombs. I did some today, which contains the leaf and the seeds of the plant, right? Every part of the plant is good, but I use the leaf and the seeds. I combine it with baking soda, citric acid, clove oil, and also peppermint oil, and I combine it in the form of a solid structure and shape it out and then plunge it out to actually get a bomb that you throw in water to detox the locks. So if you have like dirt and lint and so forth in your hair, you just immerse it, and all the dirt, excess dirt and lint would come out, right? I also have a lock scrub for your hair. It's similar to the lock bomb, but only thing you immerse it in your hair in the dry form, and you scrub out the dead cells from there. That is good also for persons who have psoriasis. Right now I'm working on a shampoo, a lock shampoo that contains the main ingredient is marijuana. It's in the process. I'm going to give you a little hint. I'm using clamor-cherry, which is locally grown here. So I'm trying to tie in the marijuana and the clamor-cherry plus the aloe plant. Yes. Plus the aloe plant, and trying to intertwine that to give a more natural base. Right? No sulfates added, these are all natural ingredients. Okay. Right now, I'm trying to bring on board some students to actually learn how to make these products. Because as I said, I was a past teacher. So some students have shown interest in making these products. Hopefully I get permission from their parents to do so, right? But you know, you have to follow rules and regulations. For me, my lab business have been growing over the past 15 years, but it has only been really beneficial after I introduced the lactonic, which is hemp-based, right? And after that, I actually get clientele from Atlanta, New York. I have clientele coming December, actually, and I'm fully booked for December. So I'm sorry.
Congratulations to you.
I don't have any more spaces at this point in time. So it's really been helpful for me because I'm a stay-at-home mom. And my kids, one is in kindergarten, one is in preschool, and my babies, my king and queens, right? And they get home from school at 3. So I have to be there to pick them up at 3. And if I was teaching it, there wouldn't be any time. But now as an entrepreneur, selling these products and making more than my teaching salary, I'm able to actually, okay, take off of there, let's go to the nail shop, right? Which is tomorrow, by the way. So that's my 2 cents. It has really been beneficial, and I'm grateful for it. And I have to give God thanks. Everything I have to give God thanks for, because if it wasn't for God, then this plant wouldn't be here. And I would like to add also that I don't like the exploitation that comes along with it, because we have the tobacco plant that is doing plenty damage, right? And this plant that was gifted to us from God, we're just taking it and throwing it and exploiting it and putting us in jail for nonsense, in my opinion, right? But once we learn to unlock certain stages in that plant, we're on the verge of becoming millionaires here in St. Kitts. That's what I want to become, eh? Nobody's stopping me, right? So once we learn how to appreciate the plant, then we're on the right path. Blender?
Sounds fun, sounds exciting. Blender?
Well, I have a deep passion for marijuana plants since, you could say, about 2001, like even before that. But I really got into it after realizing they had a whole day celebrated about marijuana, 420. That's like my second birthday. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I feel like over those years, sure, it was so restricted. You can't plant anything and so I always gravitate to the theory of it, learn more and more about the plant. That's why when he was talking like about the terpenes and so, like I get goosebumps because terpenes is my thing, because I really a THC. I really have a preference for THC. Like the terpenes, like give the characteristics, the flavors, the scent, and what's not. And my favorite too is the myrcene and the linalool, if I pronounce it properly. Yeah, those are like more like either skunky or citrus. And those are my 2 favorite like terpenes. Even though they have almost, I think it's over 100 and almost 500 components in marijuana. So it's like we're only tapping into a bit right now because it's been so restricted since, especially since the 1970s with the war on drugs. So I feel like instead of everybody just concentrating on just growing, I think they should just get more into the science first and really know what the plant will do. Because my brethren said we could make clothing, it could take pollution out of the soil and still out the air. It could oil, fuel.
We could go into them vehicles.
Exactly. And make paper so you won't have to cut down these large trees in the Amazon and all over the place. So that's why we will be actually saving the planet Earth if we grow more marijuana. It ain't just about smoking. Even though we love to smoke, but it ain't just about smoking. We could do a lot more things.
Eat it indigestion. Wait down from all who got cancer and those what they call them kind of dangerous illness there. All them kind of thing where they got in Haiti and in Africa, Ebola, all of them there. We ganja, we break down them disease. So we just have to know how to deal with the natural plant of it, you know. So, give thanks.
Just want to let you know, when you're talking about businesses, the types of licenses that are contemplated by the legislation. They have the medical cannabis transport license, the cultivation license, the infused products manufacturer license, the business dispensary license, the business lounge license, the exporter import license, and the research and development license.
When you say business lounge license, you mean hub?
Lounge.
Like a hub.
Yeah, like a coffee shop, yeah.
The hub they call them though.
Yeah.
It's a business kind of revenue business way. You should expand more into that.
These business license. You try to, like, people who already had some kind of dealing with it, because like people are opportunists, and like because they got done as a little shop or business, they can capitalize on it and leave the traditional growers and users behind.
Virgin, when the doc is going on and more, you can do some serious educational drive, you know, because we realize what we did in the 2019 report to the Farm Administration. They take up the initiative as well. They asked for recommendation, and one of the recommendations was to do public education, and we find much of the things are being left behind. Right. We really need to understand how we're going to move forward in the framework of, as the AG outlined in his discussion, and we find that's why I say me no want a licensing authority, you know, but me glad that the level come to this, because we see how so. I only talking from my view because I use ganja from a small young age, and the experience we talk from here, and it's not something to say we're forcing on anyone to say why he talking now on the TV and why he talking like that. We're talking like this because we know what we have been able to face. We get harassed by police. Police target me. I tell me, see, police done make wage that they block areas just to get that high because of the way they say I and I them. We are revolution thinker, and we are not a part of the system, but we live in it. And we're glad to see how people who are part of it now able to understand why we are moving in this movement, because we know what we had faced over the years. And we are not talking for we, like last year, we're talking for those before us. Because there's a lot of hurdles the AJ don't understand yet. When the Jamaican boat used to come here, we had to jump over water just to climb up and up, just to get the ganja and then come back down. All them kind of things.
So Rasaya, I thank you for being so candid tonight, Rasaya. We, however, do have a live audience. We're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll come right back to questions from our live audience before we have the wrap-up by our panel. So stick and stay. We'll be right back.
Look on people. Yeah. What's up, my keep? Where? What's up, my keep? No. What's up, my keep? What's up, my keep? Everybody, do what? Take over. Drop. Take over. Go. Take over. Drop. Take over. Everybody, spend all. We are the attack. I tell you, spend all.
You should be here.
Listen! Listen!
You should be here.
You should be here.
You should be here.
What if cannabis sail on the ark again?
You should be here.
We know we want back with cannabis.
You should be here.
One thing for sure.
should be here.
Despite all the controversies surrounding carnival festivity.
Thank you for staying with us. We've been having quite a spirited conversation, a candid conversation, fun, and it's really setting the framework for what is to come for the full build out of the cannabis industry. This evening, we do have a live audience with us, and we are going to allow a few members of the audience to ask some very brief questions before we head into our wrap-up. So I recognize one of our guests who's going to ask a question now.
Brewery standards. What regulations will be put in place to combat crossbreeding? I know the brewery standards guy spoke about it, and I also want to know what opportunities for the non-traditional farmers like myself, who's into hydroponics and that area of farming.
Okay, so Mr. Laplace, I'll allow you to take the first question.
Okay, I guess it's from the Bureau perspective and as well as a hydroponic perspective. Well, from the Bureau perspective, we are setting up our lab to facilitate testing, to help with the identification of strains, so you can know what type of strain you have, whether you have the, and not just strain but species, and the strain is kind of very difficult to identify as well. And we also want to look at, terpene levels in terms of concentration, if that is the market you're targeting, the cannabinoids, both THC as well as the cannabidiol. And we kind of want to facilitate that to the perspective where we are supporting the industry, whichever direction or whatever your passion is. So that is from the lab testing. So we're bringing in some equipment like the gas chromatograph, mass spec. That is one of the pieces of equipment that is used to identify levels of terpenes, pesticides, residue. And then you have PCR technology that can look at species, right? Identification. From the hydroponic perspective, there's a lot of techniques that you can use. A lot of the growers would have found that some of the highest THC and cannabinoid concentration would have come from plants that were grown indoors. So you have like some of the names, I don't know if last I would give me some permission here, but we have things like the pancake ice and grandfather OG. Those are some of the highest, 35 and I think it's 30% respectively. And those were done in Dutch bucket systems. Indoors, you have ozone scrubbers to hide the smell from the neighbors. You have solar system, you have indoor water systems, you have foil, you have carbon dioxide dosers, you have lighting and timers that run for like 12 hours. So it all depends on what type of support would be there, would determine, how could you set up. But a room like this is a pretty large operation, and you could even tear. Right, so it all depends on what is permissible under the regulation, because if you say you have, let's say that there's a license for 4,000 square feet. The floor space here is 4,000 square feet, but if you start to go aerial, then you can turn this into 20,000 square feet, the same space. So I don't know if I'm giving out too much, but possibilities are there. It's just that it have to be guided by the regulation, and from the testing side, we are bringing in equipment to support as the industry develops as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Laplace. Mr. AJ?
Yeah, regulations actually speak to laboratory testing to maintain a minimum standard. I assume what will happen is the authority will set a minimum standard for the medical use cannabis. I don't know if that will be based on maybe THC level or whatever level that is required to get to get what you need from the cannabis to be able to treat your medical ailment. But I know that there is a system set up for standard testing, and I guess maybe the authority will flesh out what is the standard. There's nothing in the current regulations that speak to cross-pollination or cross-breeding, but it does mention certain standards, and it just makes sense. If you're having a regulated industry, you must have a minimum standard. Mm-hmm. I personally do not know the science of what that minimum standard will be for this, for example, a licensed cultivator who is producing bad cannabis might lose their license. But I don't know what is the difference between bad and good. Mm-hmm. That is for the scientists to determine. But the regulations do make provision for that.
Yeah.
Mainly around the Caribbean, the Bureau of Standards, who is the stakeholder that's in charge of that, as the gentleman said, he's bringing most of the machines. But again, this depends on where we're going. Like I've said before, this industry is just a social vehicle. We decide where it's going, what we want it to carry, how many of us it wants to carry. That's something that, again, there's a lot of data that we still have to research and find out and be guided by you, because I find that everybody's pointing to the authority. The authority will be guided again by what's best for us. How many traditional growers out there, how many persons are actually involved in cannabis businesses, and we need to decide from there by gathering that information. As we go from there, then we decide what are the standards. For example, if it's just for flowering, we need to ensure that pesticide residues, all the different things, the terpene, THC is what's guiding the industry in the US, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to be guided by that. Because again, that looks specifically towards the buds, THC percentage, and getting high. But if you're doing it for medicinal, if you're doing it for other purposes, that's not the factor that you'll be guided by. In fact, in places like Canada, they're actually taxing you, not by the hectare or the area, but by the THC content of your products. So again, it's feedback. We'll be getting from persons, the general publics and the business persons, the legal minds, where are we really going and where's best to go. And then we'll decide what the standards are, guided by the Bureau of Standards.
Thank you, Doc. We unfortunately only have the opportunity to take one more question because we are going to have to wrap up quite soon. So I recognize the lady at the front, Ms. Brown, to ask a question.
Good evening, everyone. Very good discussion. I'm very happy that I came and was able to see it live and get a really good, varied perspective on who's doing what and the ideas and arguments behind everyone. One of the things that I was interested in from the very start, the AG noted that we're going to be starting with medical. And knowing Bingy Nuts and her products, actually just recently became a fan of her. And seeing what she was using within her products, I was actually very curious as to how, I don't know if the legislation says it, how businesses that produce or use marijuana to create byproducts, basically. How is it defined? Because I also noted all the other comments on traditional growers, which I actually use the word instead, indigenous businesses, because I really want to see the government protect indigenous businesses and not have the colonizers come and take over or be in a space of advantage where our own people do not get to capitalize on currently the industry is the global market is worth about $10 billion, and seeing them take that away from our people. So how do we really, what is the legislation saying about businesses producing byproducts? Does it fall within medical marijuana? And what also is the hesitation of you getting into advancing the scope of us launching not just medical but also recreational, considering that we are seeing the examples around the world, there's a lot of precedence, and it is not unknown. So you already have an idea of how it may go. But we already know, I mean, maybe not, but I'll throw another statistic out there, that only 20% of it is used recreationally, and 80% of the world's market is actually attributed towards medical marijuana use.
Very, very loaded question for you, Mr. A.G., several parts.
So the definition of medicinal cannabis product includes any substance, compound, preparation, or mixture that is produced or manufactured from cannabis material for the treatment of a qualifying medical condition. So technically, under the regime, the medical cannabis regime, if you can prove that your byproduct from the cannabis is used for medicinal purposes to treat alopecia and other sorts of medical ailments, the person can then get the prescription from the doctor and then buy the product. In relation to your second question, we do have recreational marijuana in St. Kitts and Nevis. You are allowed to smoke marijuana in the privacy of your own home without restriction. That is recreational. We don't have public recreational use of cannabis. And if you want, and you cannot purchase it. So naturally, if you're not smoking it in a place of worship, if you're allowed to smoke it at home and you're allowed to grow it at home, you grow your marijuana in the privacy of your private compound, and you smoke it with your friends and family who are all adults, and you're allowed to do that recreationally.
Well, you have something that you have to understand. You have a male and a female component that will go between both plants. So we're going to look at this here. When the male class spend the female, well, we're going to see male again. So we have to go back and get another seed to plant to get the female movements. So these are levels that we have to know how we move in planting our gongs. Because the female we are dealing with them. The male can be something like a tea or some other way different in extracting it. But some must smoke the male because there is only certain time where we see the vibration around. Mafia, if you call them in the concept, but they still have a meditation in it.
But you don't use cannabis for recreational use. You use it for meditation.
Hey, let me go there, me moving.
All right.
It's something, again, that the Act doesn't speak to, but has to be regulated by the Act. For example, claims, when persons are making claims about products, because unless there's some research and development going into it, it actually is only a claim. So the Act has to be expanded in that realm in terms of research and development, and how are claims guided. For example, you can't put something on a label or state that it cures this, unless research and development has already shown that. The Act doesn't speak specifically to that, but it needs to. In terms of recreational marijuana, the AG explained that pretty well, that Sankofa already spoke for the entire nation in terms of that. But within the Act, it speaks towards a lounge, which is definitely recreational, public, and again, that hasn't been highlighted or defined quite clearly, and that's something that has to be done.
All right, thank you, Doc. Thank you, Ms. Brown, for your questions. Thank you to all of the individuals who joined us as a part of our live audience for our cannabis panel discussion. Unfortunately, we are out of time, which means that we have come to the end of this conversation. I want to thank each and every one of our panelists for taking up the call and being here with us this evening, and for sharing so confidently, so proudly, and so intellectually. We want to thank you for tuning in. It has been my pleasure to be your moderator this evening. Do get home safe. God bless you all. Thank you and good night.